Hello everyone, I'm Brian. Today I'm going to be reacting to Consciousness with Honey Kiralia and Jay Lakhani. Honey Kiralia? I am terrible with names. So anyways, this was a request. If you have a request, please leave the title of the video, the channel, and the link in the comments below. If you leave the link, it might get put for health for review by YouTube. And also the reason why I asked for name of the channel and the link is because sometimes there are multiple names, or I'm sorry, multiple channels with the same name, and I don't know which one it'll be. So let's go ahead and get started.
So it's a pleasure to have you here, Mr. Jay Lakhani. Thank you very much for joining me. Dr. Honey Kiralia here, and I would love to discuss a few areas in a special topic, I believe, and I would like to concentrate on the word consciousness. If that is something that you'd be happy to discuss.
I'm very happy to discuss. It's nice to see you, Honey Ji, and it's good to explore this kind of issues that kind of relate to all of humanity, not just people of religion, but people generally like to understand, get a deeper idea regarding what is this thing called consciousness.
Yes, a lot of people talk about consciousness. We have Western version of consciousness. We have the Indian Hindu philosophy of consciousness. But what is the meaning of consciousness? Would you be able to perhaps describe?
Indeed. Let us first of all classify, because the word is sometimes used in different ways. For example, when you say my conscience is biting me, it goes against my conscious. That is something quite different from the word consciousness, which is a very abstract concept. When somebody says my conscience bites me, what they are meaning, what they are trying to say is that the inner compass I have, the inner moral compass I have, does not agree with what I have done or what I have not done. So it is, if you like, an inner compass we all seem to possess. We can't really understand where it comes from, but when we do certain activities, we feel happy. Sometimes we feel very unhappy with what we have done, and something within us bites us. And this we call our conscious biting us. So this is not the same as the word consciousness itself. This is the way this particular word is used.
So perhaps this
So, am I thinking of that one? I mean, we do observe people, and when we see them hurt or sad, we get that idea. But it is kind of true. Like, when we see people sad, and all of a sudden we get like, we feel sympathetic for those people, and we understand that it's wrong. Then how do you explain people? I think they're called psychopaths, or not psychopaths, maybe people who don't feel emotions towards other people. I forgot what they're called. But what about those people too? It's curious.
Soul talking to you, telling you not to do this and not to do that.
Correct.
Or guiding you from within, perhaps. And so this is what you would consider as being conscious.
No.
But what about consciousness? Because there's, again, you know, there is in the Hindu faith, we talk about consciousness. Everything is made out of consciousness. In Western philosophy, they say consciousness is the building blocks of your reality, of what you experience in life, how you enjoy life. How would you describe these two? Perhaps, what does the Hindu faith say and what does the Western faith say?
I need to get the idea of what Westerners say about consciousness. Consciousness is just your awareness, in some sense, in my opinion, I suppose. You are basically, without consciousness, you're not alive. I think I've never really thought about this, honestly, because it is something that I guess that we're, well, I guess I'll put it this way. I guess it's just something that's never really come up. Because, I mean, we talk about good and bad, but we never talk about, or at least I've never talked about consciousness. So that's a very interesting topic.
You've done your research. It's very exciting, very interesting. It's nice to have this kind of depth of understanding right before you even ask a question. Because people sometimes don't realize, when they quiz people like us, they don't realize that the way they ask the question, in a way, gives us a tremendous insight into the mindset of the questioner. So we can very quickly judge and we can respond accordingly. So I'm very pleased that you've done your job well.
Thank you very much, JG.
Okay. Now the thing is this. Again, the word consciousness, you can see it variation. For example, you can use the word unconscious, or you can use the word subconscious, and then we use the word conscious. So this is the first classification: subconscious, unconscious, and consciousness itself. Now, I'm going to focus on the word consciousness itself because that is something that you are really asking me about. Now, then we talk about subconscious and the other aspects. Now the word consciousness, this is the source of our tradition. It says the following. It says the difference between a non-living thing and a living thing is living things are somehow, they become aware of themselves. There's self-awareness. if you like, recognition that they are alive. This begins not only with human level, it happens with all living things. Even a single cell being becomes self-aware. And the word they use in English is cognition.
Yes.
They recognize, they become aware of their surrounding. Just awareness. They can't engage with it, but they're aware. And this is the beginning of life form. One of the most important aspects of all life is it is self-aware. It becomes aware of itself. A computer cannot do it. We may try and do it, but it doesn't work like that. So the difference between a non-living thing and a living thing is living things begin with this idea of awareness. This is the beginning. And the word we use in science is cognition. And this remains a mystery for modern science. They are not able to understand what is the origin of this thing called cognition. That I can make sense of the surrounding that I find myself in. What is that feature? Because it doesn't come out of matter. So it is something that remains a mystery even today. This is the beginning. Cognition.
Okay, real quick. So basically, as far as I'm understanding that awareness is not what makes us alive. Consciousness is not what makes us alive. It's cognition, apparently. At least from that understanding, because inanimate objects and animate objects are all have consciousness, but what separates the two is cognition. So cognition is what separates us from just a stone, for example. So if you remove cognition, we still have consciousness, but we're a rock or something like that. Just basically we have no awareness, I guess, which is still staying true to what they've said before. Everything has consciousness to it. Lakhani actually says that. Yeah, the spirit basically is what he said in that last interview.
But then as humanity or as living things continue to evolve from a single cell being to a more complex thing until into the animal kingdom, into the human kingdom, this faculty possessed as cognition is used as the word consciousness in the human kingdom. So the very thing that we started with cognition, just awareness, becomes much more attuned as consciousness in human beings. That is a very special feature about all living things and very special about humanity itself.
Right. So in Western forms and Western concepts, I understand that when you talk about consciousness, you're also talking about focusing your consciousness in a particular direction so that you actually materialize things in your everyday life. So wherever your consciousness goes, so in other words, in a personal development language, we could say wherever your focus and concentration goes, that's where your energy goes, and that energy then manifests things in life. So what is the importance of raising our consciousness levels? Because we also hear of people discussing that humanity needs to raise their consciousness levels. In that way, we could become better human beings, we could understand more, we could become less ignorant. What is the importance of raising consciousness levels?
In fact, this is very important. Let me do the journey. In the animal kingdom, the level of consciousness is very poor. You're just kind of aware of your surrounding and you operate at the level of instinct. That's all you have. Just instinct, your previous experience, I'll run away from here. So consciousness is very kind of limited in the animal kingdom. In the human kingdom, it becomes much more visible as ability for us to engage with reality. So we make sense of the world around us. We are not in a blur like the animals. So we make sense of the world around us and engage with it. This is the beautiful part of the human condition. This is, if you like, the normal level of human consciousness. But then again, you hear this kind of language being used very loosely sometimes, that we need to raise our consciousness. So what do you do there? Do you kind of jack it up? Do you pump it? How do you do that?
Real quick, I did look into this a little bit, which was quite fascinating. I guess what separates humans and animals to a degree, even actually infants, separates adults and infants, is self-awareness, actually. I've seen some videos where they had like a big glass, and a lot of animals are not aware that they're looking at themselves through a mirror. Even children, up to a certain point, aren't aware that they're looking at themselves. I forget what age it was when children are now self-aware that when they look at a mirror, they're looking at themselves. I think chimps or some monkeys are capable of this. I forget which ones. I think maybe gorillas. I'm not sure. But it was a very fascinating thing to learn that animals aren't aware aren't self-aware. Only very few animals are to a certain point, and babies are not self-aware. When they look in the mirror, that they're self-aware that they're looking at themselves.
The answer is this. In fact, even at the human level, the level of consciousness at which we operate is very limited. We think, no, it's full. We are fully fledged. I had, caffeinated coffee and I'm full of life and I'm fully conscious of everything. It is still very limited. It is still, the intensity with which you engage with reality is still very limited at the human level. So then when you hear this kind of language that we must raise consciousness or human consciousness, we are really in a way saying we need to stir this up further and see if there's a higher level. And the tradition that I come from says, yes, there is a higher level. We say, at the animal level, you are almost like unconscious, hardly, able to engage with reality. At the human level, you are conscious. Mm-hmm. Even in the human level, when you go to sleep, you're unconscious. You go half the time into a dozy world.
Into your sleep world, which some people say is a real world too.
So be it. But then you see, when we come across very interesting mystics or enlightened personalities, we suddenly realize that they seem to be operating at a far more intense level than we are. So what the heck is happening here? Why are they so more intensely engaged with reality? And this we call is superconscious state. There is a state called superconscious state, and the Sanskrit term is ati chetan. Mm-hmm. So chetan means conscious, ati chetan means superconscious. Now you may sound like in superlative, like Superman and all that, but in reality it is something that has to be experienced to really recognize its validity and its intensity. It is dramatically more intense than me seeing you here today. It's a very intense experience, and that is something that we need to touch base with. Now, you asked a very lovely question. You said how...
Oh, sorry. So I wonder, what is this super consciousness? So what does it do? What does it provide? What could we... So we become super aware. What does that do for us? And... Also, I guess, if he were to define what the superconsciousness does, is there a way we can obtain some of these? So, for example, if it says, oh, when we become superconscious, we become more peaceful with people. Kind of like what Sadhguru was talking about, expanding your senses. When you expand your senses in this house or this stadium, you don't want to cause harm to other people because you see them as part of you. I'm assuming maybe that's where maybe superconscious is going about. So where we develop peace. But is there ways outside of becoming superconscious to develop that? In my opinion, I guess it is quite difficult, but I think you can. But we are, and I used the phrase that we are human. Even if there was a way, it's not perfect, and maybe the super consciousness is the perfect way of that, where there are no flaws and you cannot make a mistake because you're super conscious. Where my method the method that I use to how I do my way of life, let me put it that way, is it's not saying that you're perfect, that you'll always be great and fantastic or whatever. No, you strive for perfection, knowing you'll never get there, but that strive will at least set you in a path to try to be good. But you are human, you will make mistakes, just understand that.
How does it relate to humanity? How do we raise the level of humanity? Yeah. This is the most important aspect of what you just thrown in my face, because it is telling us that really when you recognize your identity as consciousness itself, not what you're conscious about, consciousness itself, then it links you with the rest of the living kingdom in a very direct manner. For example, I see you now, I see you physically, my eyes can see you, my ears can hear you. At this level we are engaging with each other. It's still there's a distance, there's kind of intermediary in the sound and the light and all that. But when you kind of touch base with your true nature as consciousness itself, as a spirit, if I can use the word, then the link I have with other living things is very close. It doesn't require this external, involvement of sound and vision and so on. So that what happens that those mystics, those individuals who are able to touch base with a deeper vision, can relate to humanity, relate to the whole of the living kingdom in such dramatic manner that compassion flows out of them. So if we can not just expect the mystics or the prophets to raise their level of consciousness, but we want an ordinary person to become extraordinary and become fully kind of much more conscious, then you see the way they relate to other human beings will be so dynamic, so exciting, so loving, it will be unbelievable.
That's very interesting. It's a very different way of looking at something, and that's very interesting. And how would you say, what are the methods you could use? Because consciousness, from what I think your interpretation is, consciousness is a way of being. You know, you become more aware. And in our Indian, especially Hindu philosophy, they talk about the fact that you need to be aware, become a witness to life, see and observe, you know, don't, you know, everything's Maya, it's illusion we talk about. But here with consciousness, we're actually saying that you're creating the reality. Now how, meaning that you're interpreting reality in the way you're perceiving things. Now, how do we, you know, what are the methods we can use to raise our consciousness levels? How can we become more tuned in? How can we become more sensitive to how we interpret reality?
Anit, you asking such lovely questions. I'm very pleased this is being recorded. It can benefit a lot of people, including myself.
Thank you very much.
No, okay. Look, for example, the important thing is this. Almost all of us, when we look at the world around us, when we become conscious of the objects around us, our individuals around us, how do we do it? Our minds will immediately get polarized. These are the lovely words from ancient Hindu and the Buddhist tradition, which says our mind gets polarized. Think about it. Every object you see, every event you kind of encounter, your mind will automatically, his mind has got this horrible habit of polarizing itself as either attraction or aversion.
Okay.
Analyze. Even though, you know, I mean, okay, when you see somebody, you say half attraction, half aversion. This part I like, this part I don't like. But somehow the mind has got this tendency of, in a way, polarizing itself, you know, getting itself wound up as attractive or aversion. This is, if you like, the way consciousness in a way becomes visible in the way we lead our lives and how we interact with other human beings. Now, what you just said is quite true. Rather than get caught up with what your mind is telling you, as you say, construct the reality in front of you, saying, oh, I see, I don't like it, I like it. Instead of doing that, if you just see reality as it is, rather than in this polarized manner, then you see reality in its full flow, in its true glory. And that is the idea of spiritual, if you like, experience or making spiritual progress. So when, for example, this is in fact the Buddhist way as well, they say mindful living. They're saying don't let your mind get in the world. Just see things as they are rather than trying your mind interpreting it and putting its own kind of, you know, spin on it. And this is what the Buddhists teach as mindful living, and this is what Hinduism teaches. It says, this is what it says, this is the crux of the matter. It says, try and focus not on what you're conscious about, this person or this individual or that event. Don't be caught up with what you're conscious about. Refocus your attention on what consciousness itself is about. Consciousness itself. So focus on consciousness rather than what you're conscious about.
And how do you explain that? So what do we mean by becoming...
Sorry. So I was thinking, it's like how you like or dislike things. And this goes very back to your survival, basically. Again, when you see a snake or something, especially if you don't know, if you're ignorant of what the snake is, you don't know whether it's poisonous or not. So you just assume the worst, because if you assume the worst case, you're alive for the most part. If you assume the best case that it's not, you could be dead because it could be venomous. Or you know, that's your survival instincts coming into play. When you see something terrifying, there's a reason for it, and that reason is either I mean, it could be ignorant or not ignorant for that part. Because if you see a snake and you see it is in fact venomous, you run away, and you understand that it is venomous, so you're not ignorant of the reason why you're running from it. However, if you see a snake and you don't know whether it's venomous or not, you run away just because you don't want to take that chance. That survival instinct kicks in. And he's basically saying, try not to judge things. I get that, honestly. And for things that I know that are safe, I try not to judge things. So you go up to a normal human being, you know, I don't try to prejudge them necessarily, especially the way they present themselves, you know. They're all tattoos everywhere, teeth all gold, and blings all over the place, and maybe how they, you know, just try not to, because they could be a very well good human being. I don't know. I do have a bias. Again, human. I try not to judge people, but I try to interact with them and see how they are as a person.
I mean, conscious.
Of course.
You know, and concentrating on the consciousness rather than being conscious about something. How would you describe that?
You see, this process, in fact, is the whole foundation of practicing tradition, spiritual tradition. This is the same in every tradition. This is the idea. In Buddhism, they call it mindful living. In the Hindu tradition, we say, try and, look, I'll give you another example, kind of a simple example. You see, all the time when you interact with other human beings, we all find them like interfering and getting in our way and infringing on us. That's normal routine thing. In the traffic, you must have seen it already.
Yes.
And you say, not him again. But if you say, rather than say that, this is infringing on me, rather than be conscious of that, just be aware. I am aware. I'm alive. I'm conscious. Refocusing your attention on consciousness itself rather than what you're conscious about. It seems like a very simple exercise. It is almost impossible to do. But I'm telling you from my experience, that is what I do. All the time I keep taking my mind back saying, no, this is what I'm conscious about. But I am consciousness itself. And this refocusing attention on consciousness, it sounds so easy, and it is the most difficult process because it's not easy. We have been kind of tuned for thousands of lifetimes to be aware of what we are conscious about and interacting with it rather than lose track of the underpinning consciousness itself.
Yes.
There's something else I need to pull in.
Sorry. So is he saying that when you're conscious enough of an object, instead of acting upon that conscious thing of the object, just be aware of what you're being conscious about that object? So for example, if I say I grab the pen, instead of saying, oh man, it's out of ink, but instead I'd be aware that I am thinking that it's out of ink or something like that, or like, oh, I like this pen, I have to be aware that I like this pen as opposed to having a judgment of it, like whether I like or dislike this. That's how I'm understanding it so far.
You don't ask, but I must tell you. Now, you may think that consciousness is something that we already explained, understood well, and you already used this kind of scientific lingo to try and explain it. In reality, the hard problem of neuroscience today, I talk as a scientist, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I'm a physicist, but I'm talking from the science lobby. The hard problem of neuroscience, the life science, the most central feature, first was the idea of cognition. What the heck is it? They don't know how to become aware. What is that? There's nothing to do in the physical world. The second issue was, when it comes to the human level, what is the nature of consciousness? And some of the major thinkers like, Professor Susan Greenfield talk to me about this, and they say, Mr. Lakhani, we are very frank with you. We do not know what is this thing called consciousness. We seem to have it. We don't understand what the heck it is. Yes. We don't know which slice of the brain creates it. Because if we knew, then we pull out the slice of brain and say, here is consciousness in this slice of tissue here. It's not there. It seems to be everywhere and nowhere. Now, this is a language that physics doesn't like, neuroscience doesn't like. It wants to locate it. This is the source of consciousness. And this is, if you like, a hard problem of modern science, modern neuroscience. It remains unanswered up to now.
And I will say this, we may not have the technology right now for it. Again, we cannot always assume that we have everything possible right now. For example, in the past, there were doctors and scientists in the past, and with the equipment they have, they could discover only certain things and can't discover everything. Surgeries are something that's relatively new. Cutting people open and taking out stuff is still kind of new. Medicine is new, and how these medicine interacts with your body. So to say that, because we don't have the answer now, it's kind of like going back in the past, like, well, we just say we don't know, and that's fine enough for me. Where does consciousness come from? It's like, well, we don't know. It's like, well, good enough. Maybe in 200 years we can figure it out, or maybe 1,000 years, maybe never. Who knows?
So this is going more into the quantum physics side, really.
Not yet.
So it's kind of we're explaining that whatever you consciousness is everywhere. You're focusing on something, and whatever you're focusing on is what you interpret. Okay, that's a different topic. We'll be discussing some other time. Sure. So this is very interesting. Now we talked about consciousness and your interpretation of what consciousness means, but there is also things like spiritual energy. We talk about prana. So what's the difference between prana, spiritual energy, consciousness? How do we differentiate these subjects?
Wonderful. Okay. Now, first of all, the definition of akash and prana are central in our tradition. Now, akash doesn't mean space. It sounds like space because we use it casually as akash means space. Akash doesn't mean space. It means all-penetrating existence. That's the word of akash. And in this akash, this underpinning, all-penetrating existence, as if it's like a blob, all existence. Now, existence is only normally like a homogeneous thing. There's no variation. Either it exists or doesn't exist. You can't be halfway house there. So that is the underpinning to reality. But something makes this existence shudder. And when it shudders, reality comes into being. This is the depth of Hindu teaching, depth of our tradition. It says something makes it shudder, and when it shudders, creation comes into being. Otherwise, it's homogeneous, existence, everything exists, so what?
So there is just energy, and it's something, an external force comes in to activate it.
That's called prana. That's the definition of prana.
So prana activates, it's a life force.
It is the force.
So if there's a seed there and suddenly it sprouts out into a flower, then it's the prana that's helping it. And there's an energy that goes in which turns it from a seed to a flower. In the same way with us as well, we may have a potential energy or potential creativity within us. But by bringing in a lot of life force within us, a lot of prana, you start bringing it to life.
Correct.
Okay, that's very interesting. So if prana is that, then what is spiritual energy? Because we talk about a lot of these spiritual masters, enlightened beings, they have this halo around them. We talk about ourselves, we have the aura around us, the energetic
darkness
body.
Around us for a moment.
With lots of things, yes. But we have energy around us too. Now, we call this, I'm not sure whether it's spiritual energy. What is spiritual energy?
Okay, it's a lovely thing to explore. It's energy, for example. First of all, be very careful. So a lot of people think spirituality means energy. Now, energy and matter are both material things. People say, no, energy is not material. It is material. That's what Einstein is all about. Mass and energy are intertwined. You can convert energy into mass or mass into energy. That's how we get atom bomb. So this is modern physics. So sometimes people think that then when we move away from the word matter to the word energy, we sorted ourselves. No, they are strongly intertwined. This is how we define. Look, you see, simple English I can explain. How do we define matter? Matter is something that can be used by, that can be moved about by energy. Okay, fair enough. Now, how do you define energy? Energy is that which moves matter. See, it's a circular argument. They are strongly intertwined. And what Einstein did is, he said not only just this redefining each other, but actually you can convert one into the other. This is how the whole of special relativity came into being. So this is central. So when people say energy, please be careful. Energy in normal sense, electricity, this is very physical world. It's the same as matter. It's not that spiritual. So that's not the energy we are talking about.
So the spiritual energy, could it be perhaps described as a spiritual life force?
It is something dramatically different from even the word energy or physical energy that we talk about. Now, the very thing that kind of lights up people is, if you like, when you touch base, if you like, can use the English word, you get plugged into your true dimension, your true reality. If you get plugged in, this is the word I'm using.
Yes, no, I understand totally with the plugged in.
You plug it into it, and then you light up. You literally, your fuses go, wee. And if you are not, by the way, enlightenment, genuine. But if your fuses, you get plugged in, but suppose your body is not ready for it, you can blow your fuses. Real reality.
Right, this is what we talk about Kundalini awakening.
Awakening, without somebody being aware of it, they can really destroy a person. Can really damage him. So, in fact, a lovely example is, with Chaitanya, for example, one of the recent proponents, when he used to get this kind of high, deep spiritual experiences, every pore of his body would bleed. It was that dramatic, blood would come out. So, he could not maintain that experience for any long period, so he would have died. So, this spiritual energy or this, if you like, getting plugged into is really, as I said, putting your finger in the fuse box is dangerous. So, if you are not ready for it and you get enlightened, it can really blow your fuses and you can go mental or you can break down or your physical body will break down. Reality. So, you need to kind of get your physical frame, your whole mental frame in the right mode before you get plugged in, otherwise you are in trouble.
Right. So, we're talking about when there is spiritual growth taking place, you're moving forward, and there will be definitely different, as we say, a tourist goes to different attractions and you go through a spiritual path, and then you come to a path where it's time to perhaps move forward or catapult forward, and suddenly perhaps your Kundalini arises, it gets activated.
We use this word.
Yes, and as soon as your Kundalini awakens, then suddenly you're looking at life in a completely different way. And I personally recall myself, because I'm a meditator. I've been a meditator for about 17 years. I teach meditation, actually. But what I found is there was a time when I was regularly meditating and suddenly everything was brighter. Like the colors were different. I could see like a little aura, kind of like an energy around the trees, and there was a blissful feeling. There was no, anything that goes wrong, it doesn't matter. You've always got a solution. You always look at things positively. There's a blissful feeling. So this
Haniji, what you're just telling me, you are actually in a way exposing your true nature to me by saying, you see, what you just told me, it shows that the experience you had strong spiritual grounding. It was not daydreaming. Otherwise, the language you use would not come out. The words you use would not come out. I'm very rigorous in the way I interpret some of these experiences. Sometimes when people talk about it, say, Mr. Lakhani, I saw sparks. What should I make of it? I said, if you were to ask me what you make of it, that means you're not really at spiritual experience. You need to see a physician and sort yourself out. This doesn't mean because when you get a spiritual experience, as you said quite rightly, you feel enlightened. You don't need validation or credential from anybody.
Not at all, yes.
You feel very comfortable about yourself and the world you see yourself. You see in a brighter, the word you use, brighter light.
Yeah.
You see, this is the idea of going from one level of consciousness to a higher level of consciousness. You see reality much more intensely. That's what you just explained.
Yes.
That's what you described.
So is this the spiritual energy we're talking about?
Yes.
So if we talk about prana, we talked about spiritual energy, and we talked about, of course, the consciousness levels. How can we, if life can become a lot more happier, joyful, blissful, through spiritual practices or through raising your consciousness levels, as we could say, how can we collectively and individually help this whole planet, the whole world, raise its consciousness levels?
Well, you are going to lose hope there. So many people, well, there are people out there who are just so stuck up, who don't believe in this stuff. Well, I mean, I don't believe it in some sense, as in, like, how do I say this? I don't know how to interpret that. Like, I believe it in a different way. I guess that's the best way I can do it, because I don't know how to negate that. So, do I believe in some of the things said? Yes, but I interpret it a little bit differently. Or basically, I interpret it into a way that I understand it, and how I can actually see it happening. So, spiritual energy that she was talking about, the way I interpret that is inspiration. So do I believe that she's getting the spiritual energy to manifest something that she wants? Yes, absolutely. I look at that as inspiration. People sometimes are down and gloomy, and all of a sudden they just look at a bird fly. Then all of a sudden they get that inspiration or prana. I believe she was saying that. To me, those are that's how I interpret prana. I believe it's an inspiration, this surge of energy that's just all of a sudden comes into you. So that's how I believe it. I interpret it in ways that I understand it, that I've personally seen happen. So you could say they're interchangeable from my perspective until I hear prana being said something else differently. Then I associate prana with inspiration, that life force, that energy that gives you motivation or inspiration. But again, as far as understanding prana, at least from this perspective, I see that as inspiration, which is something I do believe.
Indeed. You see, we have to be pragmatic. It's not nice to talk about the philosophy, the theory. It sounds all nice and, warm and all that. How do you actually turn it into reality? The answer is very simple. You see, first of all, I don't have faith in God, by the way. You may be surprised to hear me say this. I have faith in humanity. The thing that is unfolding as human beings in front of our eyes may appear like mundane and kind of boring old people and all that, but in reality something is stirring up in every human being, trying to find expression, trying to get greater expression. So the evolutionary process continues. And I'm meeting more and more individuals, just as I met you now. I meet more and more individuals who are already signaling to me that they are becoming spiritually awakened or getting, if you like, a glimpse of a spiritual reality. Yes. So humanity in its own very systematic manner is attaining spiritual kind of enlightenment in a gradual manner. This is the right way of doing it, rather than blow your fuses. In a gradual manner, it is already unfolding. I see it in front of my eyes. I see a lot of youngsters lit up. And for example, when I do assemblies at schools, etc., and I talk about the idea of spiritual humanism, something special about humanity, which is lighting us all up and not something that's come out of matter, they all light up. They immediately come and shake my hands. They don't know what I'm talking about, but touches their heart. They know that what I'm talking about is something that really stirs them up. So humanity is unfolding in its own natural way. What can we do? What we can do is we just basically can become the catalyst for this process to continue, to become more enhanced. And the catalyst, look, this is the catalyst. this thing called social media. There's such power. This is unheard of. In 1 second, all this material to go worldwide instantaneously. And if the material we are talking about is sensible, is potent, strong, it will enter the system. So my way is, I'm doing this in my very humble manner, is to use social media to prompt, if you like, stir up humanity to discover a spiritual dimension underpinning and become more enlightened in their own way. Not my way of saying, okay, I'm your guru, rubber stamp you. I don't have time for that. But you basically unfold yourself and recognize the divinity within you and let it unfold. When it happens naturally, it's organic. And it's happening. It's not happening because of me. It's happening automatically. I'm just observing it, and I'm just stirring it up a little bit more and kind of prodding it a little bit more. But that's all. It's already happening. Yeah. So and again, this material, the way we, media is one of the most powerful tools to educate humanity, and this is the best education you can give them.
Absolutely.
Okay, there's a lot of things unpacked there. So yes, like you said, I forget what he said in the very, not quite the very beginning, but he's saying about he doesn't believe in God, he believes in humanity, which I do agree with right there. I don't believe in any gods, I do believe in humanity. And he was talking about, dang, there's another thing that I forgot, but anyways, the social media aspect. I was like, oh man, the unfolding of moving to a higher level of consciousness. Well, United States, as far as I can tell, it's going backwards right now. It's just going backwards. It's lowering the standards. And some parts of probably Western Europe, and it seems like this is something I think not necessarily developed nations. Again, I keep saying that, but I think I more mean it to be like more developed cities or developed areas, actually very specifically, where survivability is gone. So now we're just finding out, because life is so easy that we just find problems everywhere. So we're not going to a higher level of consciousness, we're just finding more and more problems. That's what's raising up. Consciousness going down, problems going up. That's what I feel like in a way. Some parts of the United States, definitely true. And I don't know how many people in the U.S. is moving to a higher level of consciousness. It feels like it's going down though. And then social media, what he was talking about. I mean, social media is a tool that we can use for good and bad. But as far as I'm hearing, it seems like it's complete and utter trash. Twitter is pretty bad. Instagram's bad. I can't blame the social media sites, because literally social media is just a tool unless they start messing with like posts and stuff, unless the social media sites start saying what can and cannot go. Otherwise it's a tool. If a social media site starts saying what can and cannot go, then it no longer is a tool. It becomes a message basically, and it's directing its message a certain way. So if it only permits one message over another, then it no longer is a tool. It becomes a message. It becomes part of something that's good or bad. A tool itself is neither good nor bad. It's a matter of how the person uses it. But if the person who created that social media starts directing the social media, that tool no longer becomes a tool. It becomes a good or bad thing. So yes, there's a lot of great things that come out of social media, but there's also a lot of trash that comes out of social media.
And you also spoke about this wonderful way that, being the catalyst. And I think that's very important, because we are seeing many people awakening at this moment in time. It's like an evolvement process. Humanity is going through this evolvement process. And we also know that we come into we go through all these different yugs in Hinduism, as we say. So it's like Kal Yuga and all sorts of different yugs we go through. So there's a time where there may be a lot of, let's say, unrest, but at the same time, we talk about duality. If there's a lot of unrest, there's going to be a lot of spirituality at the same time too. So you're balancing, and universe always tends to balance somehow. So that's really nice. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Lakhani. I really feel that, what you've shared has been very, very interesting. It's very interesting to also understand what your interpretation of certain terminology is. Because, of course, from my side, what I had understood by consciousness is material, an invisible force that we can use as human beings through, whether it's visualizations, through directed focus, attention, or whatever it is. You bring things into reality. They're building blocks of what you can experience in life. So I'm not sure how far that goes. Perhaps that's a Western interpretation, and it's based on the Eastern philosophy, where it explains, as you did, that you become a witness. You yourself are consciousness. You don't need to get consciousness from outside. You yourself are the creator, as we would put it.
And you're summarizing me so well. I don't need to say anything more now.
Well, with that, I'm sure our next part of this series is going to be absolutely very interesting. I have plenty more questions to perhaps ask you, and if you wouldn't mind sharing your knowledge with me and, of course, the world. Perhaps be a catalyst. You may be able to stir somebody's thought processes. You may be able to provide some knowledge to people, and maybe just remove some ignorance, perhaps, of people out there. Whatever the case is, I think it's about, like you said, sharing, caring, and loving and being a human being. And I'm really, really proud of the fact that I met somebody like yourself who has such beautiful humanitarian qualities in him, because this is automatically displayed with the way you are. You spoke so highly of things that you may have observed about the way I've been, but I can definitely share, Mr. Lakhani, that you are a very kind being, you're a very, very spiritually inclined being, and you have amazing humanitarian qualities. That's beautiful. So keep up the good work, and I hope to meet you again very soon.
Real pleasure, real pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so that's the end of the video. If you want to end here, that's fine. But I'm going to speak just a few words real quick. This is something I noticed at a few minutes into the video. Lakhani barely looks at her. He's always looking like off to the side. There's a few times where he actually does look at her. I guess he's just very nervous. Next to a pretty lady, I suppose. I thought that was kind of funny though. And he didn't take off his glasses too much, but he did. So that's very interesting. Consciousness and prana. I guess I need to understand those two things a little bit better, and especially cognition, or cognition? What was that word? Oh well. Anyways, but yeah. Let me hit play, see what happens there.
You don't need to.
Consciousness, cognition, yeah. So there is consciousness, but I guess maybe this is the Western interpretation of that. There's consciousness, but all beings, everything, well, as far as I can tell, everything has consciousness, but what separates inanimate objects and animate objects is cognition, and then self-awareness. I believe he didn't say self-awareness, I don't believe. But cognition is something that we have, that the human level cognition, as opposed to instinctual level, which is animals. I definitely need to look up cognition. I've heard that word said before, but it's not been spoken very much as far as my research have done. It's always been consciousness, really. Well, anyways, this is going to be part 1. Actually, I saw part 2 when I was looking this up. So part 2 will be probably after this one. Alright, so that's my reaction to consciousness with Honey Keralia. If you like my content, please consider subscribing. Thumbs up, thumbs down, down below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next vid.